Told you that, that chronic back pain, or maybe that overwhelming fatigue you get when you climb a single flight of stairs.
Right, or just that general feeling of your body slowing down.
Exactly. What if that stuff you just attribute to, getting older isn't actually aging at all?
Yeah, it's a wild thought.
I mean, what if you're looking at a completely different disease, one that's entirely curable, but it's basically just masquerading as the inevitable passage of time?
It really is masquerading. And today, we're looking at the reality that a massive percentage of what we call physiological aging is, well, it's actually just the disease of sitting still.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Our mission today is to completely unpack the fascinating and frankly kind of startling science of aging, physical activity, and how we can effectively, hack the aging process.
Yeah, to maintain our absolute highest quality of life as those calendar pages keep turning.
Right. And we have a massive stack of incredibly comprehensive clinical texts today. They're all focused on client-centered exercise prescription for older adults.
We're talking textbook chapters, clinical guidelines, demographic research, physiological deep dives.
And we are going to synthesize all of it for you.
We are. And I think the foundational concept we have to establish right up front, the lens through which all this clinical data is viewed, is the absolute separation of chronological age and biological age.
Oh, let's unpack that immediately, because this is where the whole illusion begins, right? I mean, you know exactly how old your driver's license says you are.
Right. If you were born in 1960, the math is the math.
The math is the math. That is your chronological age, and it is completely unchangeable. But the much more important, much more fluid question is, how old are your cells?
Exactly. How old is your heart muscle, your respiratory system, the connective tissue in your joints?
Right. I always look at this like a vehicle's mileage and its maintenance record.
Oh, that's a great way to think about it.
Yeah. So chronological age is simply the model year of the car. It rolled off the assembly line in 1960. So it's a 1960 model.
But the model year tells you almost nothing about how the car actually drives today.
Wait, I shouldn't just agree. I should build on that. The model year tells you nothing about the internal mechanics. The biological age is the actual wear and tear on the engine, the suspension, the chassis.
Right, because you could have a 1960 classic car that has been maintained immaculately.
Kept in a climate-controlled garage, driven regularly to keep the fluid circulating.
Oil changed, belts replaced, all of it. And if you get behind the wheel, it drives beautifully, almost like a brand new car.
Right. Or, on the flip side, you could have a 2010 model that has just been driven into the ground, completely neglected.
Left out in the snow and salt.
Never had an oil change. And the engine is sputtering, the transmission is slipping, and it's barely limping down the road.
Yeah, the 2010 model is chronologically younger, but biologically, mechanically, it's near the end of its functional life.
Wow. Yeah, that makes total sense.
And what's really fascinating about the literature we're looking at today is that global demographic realities are forcing the medical community to confront this distinction on just a massive scale.
Because of the graying of the population, right?
Exactly. We're currently experiencing what demographers call the graying of the population. And this isn't some localized event. It's a profound structural shift happening across almost all developed and many developing nations.
So if we look at the US and Canada, the largest single demographic cohort is the baby boomer generation, right? Born between 1946 and 1960.
Yeah. And the texts note that by the year 2026, roughly 20% of the population will be over the age of 65.
20%. That is 1 in 5 people.
1 in 5. We have never seen a population structure that looks like an inverted pyramid before. Or, well, at least a highly top-heavy rectangle.
Right. I mean, our healthcare systems, our housing infrastructure, public spaces, they just weren't designed for a society where a fifth of the people walking around are senior citizens.
And that infrastructure strain is precisely why the literature stresses a fundamental pivot in the goals of medicine and public health.
Because for the last century, the primary objective has just been extending the quantity of life.
Right. We invented antibiotics, improved sanitation, developed advanced surgical interventions, all basically to stop people from dying young.
But the texts point out this really stark reality, what is the inherent value of living to 95 if the last 20 years of that life are spent, bedridden?
Bedridden, cognitively impaired, physically frail, and entirely dependent on others. It's tough.
It's the difference between lifespan and health span.
Exactly. The clinical goal has shifted from simply adding years to life to adding life to those years.
Yeah.
And this brings us to a really crucial concept in the text called the compression of morbidity.
Compression of morbidity. I gotta say, it sounds incredibly academic, but when I read the definition in the source material, it struck me as probably the single most important goal any human being could have for their own future.
Yeah, it really is. Morbidity in a clinical sense is just a state of disease, disability, or poor health.
Right.
So to compress morbidity means to maintain robust health and postpone the onset of debilitating chronic disease for as long as humanly possible.
Basically squeezing that period of painful decline into a tiny, narrow window right at the very end of life.
Precisely. The objective is to live a long, highly functional, independent, thriving life. And then, when the end comes, for the decline to be rapid and brief.
You want to avoid the slow, agonizing, drawn-out deterioration that currently spans decades for so many older adults.
Yeah. It's the difference between slowly fading away in a nursing home over 15 years versus, say, playing tennis on Tuesday, feeling a bit tired on Wednesday, and peacefully passing away in your sleep on Thursday at age 92.
I mean, we all want the latter. Absolutely. But to achieve that, we really have to dismantle a massive psychological barrier first.
We do. We naturally assume that aging inherently means falling apart.
Right. Society tells us that when you get older, your back is supposed to hurt, you're supposed to get weaker, you're supposed to lose your breath walking up a hill. We just treat it as totally inevitable.
But we need to separate actual physiological aging from the rust of inactivity.
Because when you look at the raw statistics of physical decline presented in these clinical chapters, it paints a terrifying picture of what happens to the human body.
It's sobering. The biological averages are really sobering. If you look at standard physiological charts mapping human bodily functions over time, almost all systems decline at relatively predictable rates after they reach their peak in our 20s or early 30s.
Let's look at a few of the metrics highlighted in the texts, because they're wild.
Sure. Let's start with lean body mass, which is your muscle and bone. That drops by about 10% per decade after your mid-20s.
10% per decade. So by the time you're 65, you could have lost 30 to 40% of the actual functional tissue on your frame.
Yeah. And furthermore, nerve conduction velocity, which measures how fast the electrical signals from your brain travel down your nervous system to fire your muscles, that slows down by about 15%.
Okay, I want to pause on that nerve conduction velocity for a second, because a 15% slowdown doesn't really sound like much on paper. Maybe it's just a fraction of a millisecond.
Right, it sounds tiny.
But in the real world, what does that actually mean for a person going about their day?
Well, it means the difference between a near miss and a catastrophic injury.
Wow.
Imagine you're standing at the kitchen counter and you knock a glass over. Your eyes see the glass falling.
Okay.
That visual information goes to your brain. Your brain processes the geometry and the speed of the falling glass, and it sends an electrical impulse down your spinal cord, out through your peripheral nerves, to the muscles in your arm and hand.
Commanding them to shoot forward and grab the glass.
Exactly. Now, in a 25-year-old, that entire circuit happens in milliseconds. They catch the glass before it hits the counter.
Right.
But with a 15% reduction in nerve conduction velocity, the signal simply doesn't reach the hand in time. The glass shatters.
Oh, man.
Now, translate that falling glass to your own body. You trip on a rug. The time it takes for your brain to tell your foot to step forward and catch your balance is delayed.
So that 15% slowdown is a primary contributor to falls.
Absolutely. It's a huge factor.
That makes so much sense. It's not just that the muscle is weak, it's that the software communicating with the hardware is lagging.
Beautifully put, yeah.
And the texts go on to detail respiratory decline, too. Vital capacity, which is the absolute maximum amount of air you can force out of your lungs after taking the deepest breath possible, plummets by as much as 50% after reaching its peak.
Half of your lung capacity just gone.
Half, which directly impacts your maximum oxygen uptake, widely known as your VO2 max.
Right. And the literature shows that VO2 max declines by anywhere from 5% to 25% per decade after age 25.
That's a massive range, but still 25% in a decade. That's brutal.
It is. And simultaneously, by the time a person reaches age 70, they could lose 25 to 30% of their overall joint flexibility.
Ouch.
And perhaps most concerning for independent living, raw muscle strength can drop by as much as 3% every single year after age 70.
3% every year. If you are losing 3% of your strength annually, you are on a very fast track to being unable to lift yourself off a toilet seat.
Exactly.
And here's where I have to throw a massive flag on the play. I'm looking at these terrifying statistics, but I'm also looking at another statistic cited in these exact same texts, drawn from Canada's Physical Activity Guide to Healthy Active Living.
I know the one you're talking about.
Yeah, that guide states that about 60% of older adults are entirely inactive. 60%.
It's a huge majority.
More than half the population isn't engaging in any meaningful physical exercise. So if the vast majority of the population we're studying is completely sedentary, how do scientists even know what normal physiological aging is?
That is the million-dollar question.
Right. I mean, isn't it highly likely that the severe drop in lung capacity, this massive loss of muscle, is actually just an epidemic of sedentary living disease being misdiagnosed as aging?
The clinical community is grappling heavily with that exact realization right now. The texts we are reviewing validate your skepticism entirely.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It has become incredibly difficult for researchers to distinguish physiological changes that are attributable purely to the biological ticking clock of aging from the changes that are primarily attributable to a lifetime of declining physical activity or chronic disease.
So it's all tangled up.
Very tangled. However, the modern literature is making a very firm, paradigm-shifting statement. In many cases, particularly in individuals aged 50 to 75, the physical symptoms that they attribute entirely to getting old are actually the direct physiological result of sedentary living.
It's the rust on the car.
Exactly.
It is not the fact that the car was built in 1960. It's the fact that the car has been sitting in the driveway for a decade with the engine turned off and the axles have rusted solid.
A perfect illustration of this is a landmark study by Barkley and Lai, which is highlighted in the text. They looked at the biological markers of aging and the impact of endurance exercise.
And what did they find?
They found that maintaining a regular endurance exercise routine through middle age and into later years can delay biological aging by up to 12 years.
12 years of biological youth preserved. That's incredible.
Yes. So if you're 65 years old and you've remained highly active, your aerobic power, your cellular machinery, your cardiovascular efficiency, they could literally resemble that of a sedentary 53-year-old.
Wow.
The inescapable conclusion of the research is that long periods of disuse dramatically and artificially accelerate the aging of the cardiovascular, respiratory, and musculoskeletal systems.
So for you listening right now, this is a moment to honestly evaluate your own daily routine, your own bodily sensations.
Right, take a personal inventory.
Yeah. When you wake up in the morning and your lower back is incredibly stiff, or when you get winded walking up a gentle incline to your mailbox, or your knees ache when you stand up from your desk after working for 3 hours, are the aches and pains you feel a factor of the calendar?
Or are they a factor of the couch?
Exactly. Because this massive body of research strongly suggests we are blaming time for the damage we're actually inflicting upon ourselves through inaction.
And this realization completely shifts the clinical paradigm of aging. We move from passive acceptance, where we just watch people decline and offer them painkillers, to active, aggressive intervention.
Which is much more hopeful.
It is. The text analyzed the distribution of chronic conditions among older adults, too. Males tend to experience higher rates of life-threatening conditions like heart disease and emphysema.
Okay, and women?
Women who generally live longer than men experience a much higher incidence of non-fatal but highly debilitating conditions, things like arthritis and osteoporosis.
Which makes them heavily prone to long-term disability and a loss of independence.
Right. But the glaring common denominator that exacerbates, and in some cases even triggers, all of these conditions is physical inactivity.
Which means if we want to stop this decline, we need to look under the hood. We really need to understand the mechanisms.
Let's do it.
Because knowing that disuse plays a monumental role is great. But we need to understand exactly how this rust attacks the body's specific systems. If we know the biological mechanisms of the decline, we can understand how the antidote of exercise actually works.
Exactly. Where should we start?
I want to start with the cardiovascular system. We hear about heart disease constantly, but what is physically happening to the pump and the pipes as the decades pass?
Okay, structurally and mechanically, the cardiovascular system undergoes profound alterations, largely driven by a combination of cellular aging and, again, a lack of demand.
Let's look at the pump itself first.
The heart's overall ability to circulate blood diminishes because in sedentary individuals, both the physical size of the heart muscle and the volume capacity of its chambers actually decrease.
Wait, it shrinks because it isn't being forced to pump massive volumes of blood during exercise.
Exactly. It's like a bicep that you put in a cast. The muscle atrophies. And at the same time, the pipes carrying the blood undergo a dangerous transformation. The walls of the blood vessels, particularly the aorta and the larger branches of the arterial tree, begin to thicken and harden.
So they lose their youthful elasticity.
Yes, and in clinical terms, this increases what we call total peripheral resistance.
Wait, total peripheral resistance? Let's make sure that's completely clear for everyone. I picture it like this. When you're 20, your blood vessels are like fresh, high-quality rubber balloons.
Great analogy, yes.
So when the heart pumps a surge of blood into them, they easily expand to accommodate the pressure, and then they just snap back.
Right.
But as we age and sit still, it's like those rubber balloons turn into stiff, unyielding plastic PVC pipes. So when the heart tries to pump the same amount of fluid through, the pipes won't expand. That resistance to the flow is the peripheral resistance.
That is a highly accurate mechanical analogy. And because those vessels won't expand to absorb the surge of blood, the pressure inside the system skyrockets.
Which is why blood pressure goes up.
Exactly. This is why systolic and diastolic blood pressure reliably increases with age in sedentary populations. The pump has to work significantly harder to push fluid through a rigid system.
That sounds exhausting for the heart.
It is. And to compound the problem, the nervous system's interaction with the heart changes too. There's a marked decrease in sympathetic nerve activity directed to the cardiac muscle.
Meaning the go-fast signals from the brain to the heart become muted.
Yes. The heart's beta receptors become less responsive to adrenaline and noradrenaline.
Oh, I see.
As a result, your maximal achievable heart rate decreases by about 5 to 10 beats per decade. So a 20-year-old might be able to push their heart rate to 200 beats per minute during an all-out sprint. A 70-year-old might max out at 150 beats per minute.
That's a huge drop in top speed.
It is, but the most critical mechanical failure happens during the actual squeeze of the heart. The contractions of the cardiac muscle become weaker, which leads to a decreased ejection fraction.
Ejection fraction. I see that term on medical charts all the time. What exactly is the fraction we're talking about here?
The ejection fraction is the percentage of blood leaving your heart each time it contracts.
Okay.
When your heart's left ventricle fills with blood, it doesn't pump out 100% of that blood when it beats. A healthy, strong heart might pump out 60% or 70% of the blood residing in the chamber with a single forceful squeeze.
So that 60 or 70% is the ejection fraction.
Yes, but as the heart muscle weakens and stiffens with age and inactivity, that squeeze becomes less powerful. The ejection fraction might drop to 50% or 40%. It leaves more stale blood behind in the chamber.
Wow. So if we synthesize all of that, the pump is physically smaller, the pipes it's pumping into are stiff and resistive, the top speed of the pump is restricted, and every time it squeezes, it pushes less fluid out than it used to.
It is a catastrophic combination for cardiovascular output.
The clinical text actually states that cardiac output during maximum exercise decreases by an average of 30% between the ages of 20 and 80.
And that 30% reduction in fluid delivery directly and severely impacts your maximal aerobic power, your VO2 max.
Right, because VO2 max is a measure of how much oxygen your body can take in, transport through the blood, and actually utilize in the muscles.
Exactly. When your cardiovascular delivery system degrades, your oxygen uptake drops. And the text highlights a critical threshold here. When a person's VO2 max drops below 15 to 18 milliliters of oxygen per kilogram of body weight per minute, they cross a terrifying line.
Wait, what happens at that line?
At that threshold, the ordinary basic activities of independent living, making a bed, walking up a slight incline from the car to the grocery store, carrying a laundry basket, they become maximal exertion events.
You're kidding. Making a bed becomes a maximal exertion event.
Yes, because they demand almost all the oxygen the body is capable of processing.
Yeah.
Just living your daily life puts you in an exhausting oxygen deficit, leading to chronic, crushing fatigue.
That's wild. Which perfectly transitions us to the other half of that oxygen equation, actually. The heart and the vessels transport the oxygen, but the respiratory system has to extract it from the air in the first place.
Right, we have to talk about the lungs.
What is the rust doing to the lungs?
Well, the respiratory system suffers from mechanical stiffening, very similar to the cardiovascular system. The lungs themselves lose their elastic recoil.
Elastic recoil.
Yeah, A youthful lung acts like a tightly coiled spring. It wants to snap back to its resting state, which helps push air out during exhalation. As we age, that tissue loses its elasticity, meaning the lung doesn't empty as efficiently.
Ah, so stale air just kind of hangs out in there.
Exactly. Furthermore, there's a gradual decline in the actual number of alveolar sacs.
The alveolar sacs being those microscopic little clusters at the very end of the airways where the oxygen actually crosses over into the bloodstream.
Correct. They're like tiny balloons. As they degrade and decrease in number, the total surface area available for gas exchange shrinks. You physically have less cellular real estate to absorb oxygen.
That makes sense.
But the structural changes outside the lungs are equally problematic. The chest wall itself literally stiffens. The cartilage connecting your ribs to your sternum calcifies and hardens.
Oh, wow.
And the strength of your diaphragm and intercostal respiratory muscles decreases.
Let me get this straight. So you're trying to expand a stiffened, calcified rib cage using weakened muscles just to inflate lungs that have fewer air sacs and have lost their ability to spring back.
That's the reality.
The amount of mechanical effort required just to take a deep breath is massively increased.
Exactly. The text notes this leads to early closure of small airways during exhalation, trapping even more stale air in the lungs. You also see a decreased sensitivity in the respiratory centers of the central nervous system. Your brain basically becomes less responsive to dropping oxygen levels in the blood, so it doesn't trigger the urge to breathe as forcefully as it should.
Okay, so the engine is starving for air, the fuel pump is weak, and the fuel lines are calcified.
Pretty bleak, right?
Yeah, but the most visible signs of aging, the things people notice when they look in the mirror or try to lift a grandchild, those happen in the chassis. The structural integrity.
The musculoskeletal system.
Right. Let's look at the musculoskeletal system and this phenomenon known as sarcopenia.
Right. So sarcopenia is defined clinically as the age-related loss of skeletal muscle mass, strength, and contractile properties.
But the term loss of mass doesn't quite capture the reality of what is happening inside the tissue, does it?
No, it doesn't. Because it isn't just that the muscle gets smaller. The very composition of the tissue degrades. The text notes a significant increase in interstitial fat content.
Interstitial fat. Okay, to give a visual for that, it's not the fat sitting on top of the muscle just under the skin. It's fat marbling inside the muscle belly.
Good way to picture it.
If you picture a cheap, tough cut of meat versus a highly marbled Wagyu steak, the aging human muscle starts to resemble the heavily marbled steak. Fat deposits infiltrate the space between the muscle fibers, which really compromises the muscle's ability to contract efficiently.
That marbling effect decreases the density and the quality of the muscle. Alongside this, joint motion diminishes due to changes in connective tissue, and the actual blood flow to the muscle beds declines, starving the tissue of nutrients.
But the detail in the research that absolutely blew my mind was the specific method of this muscle loss.
Oh, the selective wasting.
Yes. It is not an even across-the-board shrinkage. Your body doesn't just uniformly dial down all your muscle fibers. There is a highly selective, targeted decline in muscle fiber size and number, primarily focused on type 2 fibers.
This is perhaps the most crucial biomechanical concept in the entire study of aging. Human skeletal muscle is primarily made up of two types of fibers.
Type I and type 2.
Exactly. Type I fibers are your slow-twitch fibers. They use oxygen highly efficiently, they're built for endurance, and they can contract for hours without fatiguing. Yeah. Think of a marathon runner's legs. They are dominated by slow-twitch fibers.
Okay.
Type 2 fibers are your fast-twitch fibers. They don't use oxygen well, they fatigue very quickly, but they are capable of massive, explosive, instantaneous force generation.
So think of an Olympic weightlifter or a 100-meter sprinter.
Precisely. And the research shows that because of a high concentration of these type 2 fast-twitch fibers in the back and the thighs, specifically the quadriceps and the hamstrings, these large muscle groups are the very first to atrophy and waste away in older adults.
The mechanism behind this selective wasting is neurological, right?
Yes. Our motor nerves, which connect the spinal cord to the muscle fibers, naturally die off at an increasing rate as we age. But the motor units we lose are predominantly the large, high-threshold nerves that innervate the fast-twitch fibers.
Oh, I see.
When the nerve dies, the muscle fiber it was attached to is essentially orphaned. If it isn't re-innervated by a neighboring nerve, the fiber dies and is absorbed by the body.
Wow.
Because this happens mostly to fast-twitch nerves, aging muscles are left with a massive predominance of slow-twitch fibers. The remaining muscle mass is not only physically smaller and weaker, but its fundamental character has changed. It is slower.
Okay, let me try an analogy here to solidify this, because understanding this fast twitch loss is like the key to everything else we're going to discuss.
Go for it.
Imagine your body's muscular system is a city's fleet of municipal vehicles.
Okay, I like it.
The type 2 fast twitch fibers are your emergency response vehicles. The ambulances, the fire trucks, the police interceptors. They sit in the firehouse most of the day, but when an emergency happens, they explode into action. They are incredibly fast, and they respond instantly to a crisis with massive power.
Perfect.
Now, the type I slow twitch fibers are the city's garbage trucks and street sweepers. They're incredibly reliable. They cruise the streets at 10 miles an hour all day long. They never seem to run out of gas, but they absolutely cannot move quickly.
No, you're not winning a race in a garbage truck.
Exactly. What aging does, particularly when combined with a sedentary lifestyle where you never have physical emergencies, is it slowly decommissions all your ambulances and fire trucks. The city budget cuts them. You are left with a massive fleet of slow, steady garbage trucks.
That is a phenomenal way to visualize it. And it brings up a really vital clinical question. Why does the loss of these emergency vehicles matter so much for a person just trying to live their daily life?
Right, because most older adults aren't trying to sprint 100 meters or lift a massive barbell. Why do they need explosive, fast-twitch fibers?
And this introduces the critical biomechanical distinction between strength and power.
Okay, let's define those.
Strength is the simple ability to generate force. How much weight can you move? Power, however, is the ability to generate force quickly. It requires timing, neuromuscular coordination, and the application of maximum velocity. Power is work divided by time.
Right.
And the clinical data shows that power declines much earlier and much more precipitously with age than raw strength does.
Because getting out of a deep, plush armchair doesn't just require the raw strength to lift your body weight. You could have the strength to leg press your body weight on a machine, but if you do it at 1 millimeter per second, you won't get out of the chair.
Exactly. You need the explosive power to generate momentum to break the gravitational hold of the chair.
You need power for almost all dynamic movements in the real world. Think about crossing a busy 4-lane street. The pedestrian countdown timer hits 10 seconds. You don't need endurance to cross that street. You need the explosive velocity to lengthen your stride and hurry across before the light turns red.
But the most vital, life-saving application of power is catching yourself during a fall.
Oh, absolutely.
If you're walking through your living room and the toe of your shoe catches the edge of a thick rug, your center of gravity instantly pitches forward. You do not need endurance in that moment.
You need power.
You need an instantaneous, explosive contraction of your hip flexors and quadriceps to shoot your foot forward, plant it on the ground, and arrest your momentum before your hip strikes the floor.
And that action takes a fraction of a second.
Yes, it is pure power. It relies entirely on fast-twitch fibers. And the literature unequivocally states that leg power is a stronger predictor of functional status, independence, and survival in elderly women than any other physiological measure assessed.
Wow. Which translates directly into how older adults move through the world. The texts go deep into the biomechanical changes in locomotion and gait.
They do. It says that by age 70, average gait speed, simply how fast a person walks down a hallway, is 20% slower than in younger adults.
But it isn't just that they're walking slower,
Yeah.
right? The entire mechanics of the stride change.
Exactly. The stride length decreases. They take shorter, choppier steps. And they spend a drastically increased amount of time in what biomechanists call double support time.
Double support time, which is the phase of the walking cycle where both the right foot and the left foot are in contact with the ground simultaneously.
Right. When younger, healthy individuals walk, they spend very little time in double support because they are confidently spending most of their stride balancing on one leg while the other leg swings forward to propel them.
But older adults drastically increase their double support time as like a subconscious neurological coping mechanism.
Precisely. They're experiencing a deterioration of their sensory systems, their vision might be declining, their inner ear balance is compromised, and they lack the fast twitch power to catch themselves. Therefore, they have a very real, very justified fear of tripping.
So to maximize stability, they keep both feet planted on the floor for as long as possible during each step. They adopt a flatter foot-to-floor contact. They reduce the rotation of their ankles and hips, essentially shuffling rather than striding.
And while this shuffling increases their base of support and makes them feel safer, it absolutely destroys their biomechanical efficiency.
It does.
Yeah, the energy cost of walking skyrockets. Because they aren't using the natural pendulum momentum of a long stride, their muscles have to work constantly to pull them forward. It takes significantly more oxygen and muscular effort for a frail older woman to walk at 2 miles per hour than it takes a younger woman to walk at the exact same speed.
Oh man, so if we look at the dashboard of this vehicle we're studying, the fast-twitch emergency response fibers are dead or dying. The explosive power required to catch a fall is fading. The heart is a weak pump, pushing against stiff, calcified pipes. The lungs have lost their elastic recoil and their air sacs.
And simply walking to the kitchen has become a high-energy, terrifying endeavor that drains an already depleted oxygen supply.
If we stop the analysis here, this is an incredibly bleak, depressing picture of the human future.
It is a tragedy if we accept it as inevitable. But the entire premise of these clinical texts, the entire foundation of client-centered exercise prescription, is that this trajectory is a choice. It is not entirely inevitable.
We have an antidote.
We have an antidote.
So the intervention. How exactly does moving weights around or riding a stationary bike rescue these incredibly complex biological systems? I mean, it's hard for a layperson to conceptualize how doing some squats can actually reverse cellular death and arterial stiffening.
It sounds like magic, but the data is undeniable. Let's look at the neuromuscular aging curve presented in the text by Señor Isle in 2011. This graph is one of the most astonishing things I've seen in medical literature.
It really is a beacon of hope in the clinical data. The chart graphs total muscle cross-sectional area against chronological age, right?
Yes, the normal aging curve, represented by a solid, depressing line, shows a steady, unavoidable drop-off in muscle mass, starting gently around age 40 and then plummeting almost vertically after age 60.
That represents the standard sedentary trajectory.
Right, but then the graph introduces an intervention. It plots what happens when appropriate high-intensity exercise is introduced at various stages of life.
And the results defy logic. If a client at age 60, right as that curve is starting to plummet, begins a structured resistance training program, the curve doesn't just flatten out to stop the decline. It bends sharply upward.
A 60-year-old can see a 50% improvement in neuromuscular performance and muscle area.
A 50% improvement in a system that was actively dying. That's crazy.
But the adaptations don't stop there. The graph shows that if a client waits until age 75 to start, they can still achieve a 50% improvement.
Wait, really? At 75?
Yes. But most staggeringly, if an individual waits until age 90 to begin resistance training, the intervention yields an 80% improvement.
No way! 80% at 90 years old.
The biological curve literally shoots upward, reclaiming decades of lost tissue before the inevitable, much slower decline resumes.
Okay, now, to be scientifically accurate, the text does note that if a client has been training their entire life, their overall curve starts much higher on the graph.
Right. They still experience an age-related decline, but because their baseline is so high, an 80-year-old lifelong lifter remains at a functional level equivalent to an untrained sedentary person who is 30 or 40 years younger.
But the ultimate point of the Señor Isle graph is that it is never too late. Even starting at age 90, the human body is absolutely desperate to adapt and rebuild itself if you give it the correct stimulus.
The malleability and adaptability of the aging human musculoskeletal system is just staggering. To prove this, the texts lean heavily on a landmark study conducted by Frontera in 1988.
Oh, this study.
This study shook the foundations of geriatric medicine. They took a group of older males, aged 60 to 72, who were entirely untrained, and put them on a high-intensity strength training program.
And we really need to clarify high intensity, because in 1988, prescribing exercise for a 70-year-old usually meant handing them 2-pound pink vinyl dumbbells and having them do arm circles in a chair.
Exactly. The medical establishment was terrified of hurting older adults. But Frontera pushed the boundaries. He didn't use light weights, he prescribed heavy, challenging lifting.
How heavy?
The subjects lifted at 80% of their 1 repetition maximum. They performed 3 sets of 8 repetitions 3 days a week, focusing on major muscle groups like the quadriceps. They were pushing their bodies to the absolute limit of muscular failure.
Heavy, grueling lifting for men in their late 60s and early 70s. And what were the physiological consequences? Did their bodies break down?
Quite the opposite. In just 12 weeks, a mere 3 months of training, the researchers observed an average strength increase of 150% in the targeted muscles.
Wait, let me emphasize that. They more than doubled their raw strength in 12 weeks.
They did. Furthermore, biopsies showed a 10% increase in actual physical muscle mass. They literally regrew the cellular tissue that had been wasting away. The fibers thickened, the protein synthesis pathways turned back on.
And this wasn't an isolated finding either. The text cites another pivotal study by Kandau, which looked at a similar 12-week heavy resistance training protocol in men in their 60s.
The Kandau study is even more profound because of its control group. They compared the 60-something men to a control group of healthy, active men in their 20s.
And what happened?
After 12 weeks of heavy resistance training, the older men completely eliminated the baseline deficits in muscle size and strength compared to the young men. Their functional strength and their muscle cross-sectional area returned to the exact levels of healthy young adults.
That is essentially biological time travel. You are physically reverting the clock of your musculoskeletal system by 40 years.
It's remarkable.
And the rescue operation isn't limited to the muscles. The texts delve into the immune system, too. We always hear about older adults being vastly more susceptible to viruses, pneumonia, the flu. But exercise provides a biological shield.
Yes. The text cites a 2009 study by Neiman that looked at the effects of a simple, brisk walking program on the immune function of elderly women. 5 days a week for 12 weeks.
And the results were highly clinically significant. That simple routine of brisk walking lowered the risk of catching the common cold by more than 1/2 in the elderly subjects.
To understand why this happens, we have to look at the mechanism of immune mobilization. When you engage in brisk walking, you increase your heart rate, which increases the shear stress of blood flow against your vascular walls, and you increase lymphatic circulation.
Okay, so it gets things moving.
Right. This physical act of pumping fluids through the body temporarily mobilizes critical immune cells, like natural killer cells, neutrophils, and macrophages, pulling them out of reservoirs in the spleen, the lungs, and the bone marrow, and circulating them rapidly through the bloodstream.
It's like sending the police force out on active patrol across the entire city, rather than letting them sit dormant in the precinct.
Exactly. During and immediately after each bout of walking, these immune cells are patrolling the body at elevated levels, actively hunting down and destroying invading viruses and bacteria.
Now, this elevated state is temporary, right? It returns to baseline within a few hours.
It does. However, it implies that near-daily physical activity is optimal because it creates these frequent, acute spikes in immune surveillance.
Makes total sense. Over the course of the Neiman study, the fit, active subjects experienced an 8% rate of upper respiratory tract infections compared to a massive 50% infection rate for the sedentary control group.
It's a huge difference.
So we're regrowing muscle, we're boosting the immune system, but we need to circle back to the most terrifying threat to older adults: falls.
Right.
According to the National Safety Council data cited here, the leading cause of disability, nursing home admission, and injury-related death for individuals 65 and older is falls.
Yeah, and the economic burden is staggering. The text notes that the medical treatment cost related to falls for older persons in the U.S. alone was projected to hit $43.8 billion by 2020.
Over $40 billion and thousands of lives lost simply because the human body loses its ability to balance against gravity. How does exercise specifically target balance?
This is where the specificity of the exercise prescription becomes critical. General movement is good, but targeted strength training, specifically eccentric training, has been shown to radically decrease the magnitude of unsteadiness and sway in older adults.
Let's break down eccentric training, because it's kind of a counterintuitive concept. When people think of lifting weights, they think of the concentric phase, the pushing or the lifting.
Right, like pushing the barbell up off your chest or curling the dumbbell up to your shoulder. That is the muscle shortening underload.
Eccentric training is the exact opposite.
Yes, eccentric training focuses on the lengthening phase of the muscle contraction. It is the active, controlled lowering of the weight.
So imagine doing a bicep curl. The eccentric phase is the 3 seconds it takes to slowly, smoothly lower the dumbbell back down to your waist.
Exactly. Or, in a real-world scenario, it is the act of slowly lowering your body weight into a chair without simply collapsing and falling the last few inches.
Why does that specific lengthening motion improve balance more than pushing?
Because eccentric contractions require a tremendously higher degree of motor control and neurological firing. Your brain has to orchestrate millions of muscle fibers to slowly release their tension in a perfectly synchronized sequence.
Oh, wow.
By focusing heavily on eccentric training like slow step downs off a box or slowly lowering into a squat, you are forcing the brain to rebuild and strengthen the specific neural pathways responsible for deceleration, stability, and spatial awareness.
You are literally rewiring the nervous system to eliminate unsteadiness.
Exactly.
But here is where it gets really interesting and kind of tragic. The absolute devastating irony mentioned in the text is how society and the individuals themselves naturally respond to the fear of falling. What does an older adult do when they feel unsteady on their feet or when they experience a minor trip on the stairs?
They adopt what the literature calls a cautious lifestyle.
A cautious lifestyle.
It is a perfectly logical psychological response that results in biological catastrophe.
They stop walking to the corner store because the sidewalks are uneven. They stop taking the stairs and only use the elevator. They stop gardening.
They sit in their recliners for longer periods.
They actively try to protect themselves from the trauma of a fall by drastically cutting back on any physical activity that challenges their balance.
Which is the exact opposite of what the biology demands. By adopting the cautious lifestyle and eliminating physical challenges, they massively accelerate the atrophy of their type 2 fast-twitch fibers because they are never required to generate power.
Their joints stiffen further from disuse. Their neural pathways for balance degrade into non-existence.
By trying to avoid a fall through inactivity, they actually guarantee that a catastrophic fall will occur. They are actively eliminating the single most effective preventive therapy available to them. It is a devastating negative feedback loop.
Wow, okay. So heavy resistance training and eccentric control rescue the muscles, the bones, and the nervous system. But let's look at the engine itself. We established earlier that the aging heart becomes a weak pump, the ejection fraction drops, and the blood vessels become stiff plastic pipes.
Right.
If an older adult gets on a stationary bike and starts doing aerobic training, how does the body fix that cardiovascular rest? Because we know you can't just grow a new heart.
Right. And this is one of the most fascinating physiological divergences in the text. It details how different age groups adapt the exact same cardiovascular stimulus.
Oh.
When a 25-year-old starts a rigorous endurance running program, their body primarily adapts through central adaptations, meaning the heart itself physically changes.
Okay, so the pump gets stronger?
Yes. The left ventricle hypertrophies. It grows larger and stronger. The heart's stroke volume massively increases, allowing it to pump a significantly larger volume of blood with every single beat.
But the older heart can't do that.
Not to the same degree. Due to cellular senescence, mild fibrosis in the cardiac tissue, and the stiffening of the surrounding structures, the older heart loses much of its elasticity and its ability to undergo massive hypertrophy.
So what does it do?
Older clients do experience some mild central adaptations, but the vast majority of their cardiovascular improvement comes from profound peripheral adaptations.
Peripheral, meaning out in the limbs, in the delivery system, rather than the pump itself. How does the periphery adapt?
Well, if the pump can't push more blood, the body brilliantly decides to become infinitely better at using the blood that does arrive.
Oh, that's smart.
Endurance training in older adults triggers a massive increase in capillary density within the working muscles. The body literally grows miles of new microscopic blood vessels to bathe the muscle fibers in blood.
Miles of new blood vessels.
Yes. Furthermore, inside the muscle cells, the number and size of mitochondria, the cellular power plants, increase. The oxidative enzymes responsible for extracting oxygen from the hemoglobin in the blood become vastly more numerous and efficient. This is known clinically as improving the arteriovenous oxygen difference.
Okay, to use our car analogy from earlier.
Yes, bring it back.
It's like realizing you can't put a massive 500 horsepower V8 engine into your old classic car because the frame can't handle it. So instead, you completely overhaul the aerodynamics, you strip out excess weight, and you put on highly efficient, low resistance tires.
Exactly. The car can now go just as fast and perform just as well, but it does it by maximizing efficiency rather than brute force.
Because the peripheral tissues become so incredibly efficient at extracting oxygen, the heart doesn't have to work as hard.
Right. At any given submaximal exercise level like walking up a hill, the trained older adult will experience a dramatically decreased heart rate, decreased blood pressure, and decreased ventilation compared to their sedentary self.
The sheer mechanical strain on their aging cardiovascular system plummets.
Yes. And the most encouraging, triumphant sentence in this entire section on cardiovascular physiology is this. It is also encouraging that the cardiovascular system responds to training regardless of previous physical activity patterns.
It does not matter if you have sat on a couch, smoked cigarettes, and eaten potato chips for 40 years. If you finally get up and challenge the cardiovascular system, it will forgive you.
It will. It will begin building new capillary beds and producing oxidative enzymes on day one.
So the science is indisputable. The physiological benefits are undeniable. We can bend the neuromuscular aging curve upward. We can regenerate fast-twitch emergency power. We can massively reduce fall risk through eccentric rewiring. We can boost the immune fleet, and we can create peripheral oxygen efficiency.
You know exactly what the biological antidote is.
But as anyone who has ever made a New Year's resolution knows, knowing what to do and actually getting up and doing it are two entirely different universes.
They really are.
Which brings us to the most difficult hurdle in clinical practice, the psychology of change, getting the client over the starting line.
This is where the clinical text transitions sharply from physiology to psychology. Because you can write the most biomechanically perfect, scientifically validated exercise prescription in the world, but it is completely useless if the client refuses to perform it.
Right. To understand the psychological barrier, the texts apply the trans-theoretical model of behavior change, specifically to older adults.
Right, the trans-theoretical model.
I've seen this used in addiction recovery and smoking cessation. It maps out the stages of readiness, doesn't it?
Exactly. It outlines a psychological continuum of 5 stages: pre-contemplation, contemplation, preparation, action, and maintenance.
Okay.
And the harsh reality that fitness professionals must face is that, statistically, only about 20% of people with a detrimental health behavior are actually in the preparation or action stages at any given time.
So 80% of the aging population is trapped in the earlier stages.
Yeah. The text notes that in senior living facilities, even when exercise classes are offered for free right down the hall from their bedrooms, the average rate of participation hovers around 20 to 25%.
That's crazy. Let's break those earlier stages down. Pre-contemplation is when a person isn't even thinking about starting an exercise program in the next 6 months.
Right. They might be completely ignorant of the benefits, or, more likely with older adults, they might hold deeply ingrained mistaken beliefs.
Like what?
Well, they might have osteoarthritis in their knees and genuinely believe that walking or squatting will grind their cartilage into dust and destroy their joints, when in reality, the synovial fluid generated by movement is the only thing that will lubricate and save the joint.
Oh, wow. So they are paralyzed by misinformation.
Exactly. Then you have the contemplation stage. These individuals are aware they should exercise, and they're seriously thinking about starting in the next 6 months. They are weighing the pros and cons.
But for an older adult who has been sedentary for decades, the con side of the scale is heavily weighted with massive psychological barriers.
Very heavily weighted.
What are the primary cons they perceive?
The primary barrier is an overwhelming fear of injury. They are terrified of breaking a hip or throwing out their back. Second is the fear of severe fatigue and lingering muscle soreness. They already feel tired, and they believe exercise will completely deplete their remaining energy reserves.
That makes sense. What else?
Then there are logistical fears, the expensive equipment or a gym membership, the physical difficulty of traveling to a facility, especially in bad weather. And perhaps the most insidious barrier is social. They feel incredibly self-conscious.
Oh, think about the emotional vulnerability of that. If you're 70 years old, you haven't worked out in 30 years, your body has changed, you feel frail, the idea of walking into a modern, brightly lit commercial gym, surrounded by complicated machines you don't understand, surrounded by fit 25-year-olds in spandex, is absolutely terrifying.
It's humiliating.
It really is. So how does a clinician move a patient from that terrified contemplation stage into preparation and eventually into action? The text hammers on one vital, foundational psychological concept: self-efficacy.
Self-efficacy, a concept pioneered by psychologist Albert Bandura, is the absolute core of behavior change.
What is it exactly?
It is defined as the belief in one's own capabilities to organize and execute the courses of action required to produce given attainments. Simply put, it is the deeply held internal belief that I can actually do this specific task and I can be successful at it. If a client does not possess self-efficacy regarding exercise, they will never start. Or, if they are forced to start, they will quit at the very first sign of difficulty or discomfort.
Okay, let me pose a real-world scenario to you then. I want to see how this psychology is applied clinically.
Let's hear it.
Let's say I am an exercise specialist. I have a new client sitting in my office. Her name is Margaret. She is 68 years old. She has been entirely sedentary since she retired a decade ago. She has mild osteoarthritis in her knees, and her doctor told her she needs to lift weights.
Okay.
She is sitting across from me. Her arms are crossed. She looks terrified, and she tells me she is certain that lifting weights is going to throw her back out or cause her immense knee pain. Her self-efficacy is 0. How do you, as the clinician, build self-efficacy in someone who is that profoundly scared?
The clinical guidelines provide a very specific step-by-step psychological protocol for Margaret. The very first rule is avoid information overload. Do not bombard her with physiological charts about fast-twitch muscle fibers or explain the biomechanics of the knee joint. Do not give her a complex 10-step exercise routine. You must drastically reduce the cognitive load to make the task seem entirely manageable and simple.
Keep it to 1 or 2 simple instructions.
Exactly. The second strategy is the careful use of positive imagery and cueing during teaching. You must control her internal narrative.
Give me an example of that. What is the wrong way to cue Margaret versus the right way?
The wrong way to cue an exercise is to focus on the pathology or the avoidance of pain.
Okay.
If you are teaching Margaret how to do a seated row with a resistance band, you never say, make sure your lower back doesn't twinge, or stop if you feel a sharp pain in your shoulder.
Because the moment you mention back pain, her brain fixates on her fear of back pain, her muscles tense up protectively, and her anxiety spikes.
Precisely. The right way is to use positive, success-oriented imagery. You say, Margaret, as you pull this band, I want you to focus on feeling your shoulder blades gently squeezing together in the back like they are trying to hold a pencil. When you feel that gentle squeeze, you are activating the exact right muscles and you're doing it perfectly.
You focus her mind entirely on the physical sensation of successful completion, not the avoidance of injury.
You are manufacturing a mental win.
And the physical introduction has to mirror that mental win, right? The text stresses that the physical demands of the first few sessions must be incredibly low.
Yes.
It says that the primary goal for the initial session might simply be to achieve a full, pain-free range of motion at a slow, controlled speed with absolutely no resistance applied.
That is paramount. The first session is not about building muscle. It is about building trust.
Building trust.
If Margaret's first session causes her undue pain or delayed onset muscle soreness the next day, she is never coming back. Her bias will be confirmed. You have to manufacture physical success.
So you design the initial goals so low that you guarantee she achieves them flawlessly.
Exactly. When she successfully completes a set of unweighted squats and realizes nothing hurts, her self-efficacy picks upward. She thinks, I did that, it didn't hurt, maybe I can do it again next week.
And a crucial part of manufacturing that success is accurately accommodating her specific current level of fitness, isn't it? You can't give a standard senior workout to everyone. The text outlines a specific hierarchy of physical function for older adults to guide this categorization.
Yes, the continuum of physical function categorizes older adults into 5 distinct groups based on their capabilities.
Let's walk through those.
At the very top, you have the physically elite. These are the older adults who are competing in senior sport tournaments, running marathons, lifting heavy weights. They are biologically decades younger than their peers.
Okay.
Below them are the physically fit, who exercise regularly for health but don't necessarily compete.
And then we get into the danger zones.
Correct. The middle category is physically independent. This describes the vast majority of older adults. They can execute all their basic activities of daily living, cooking, cleaning, driving, walking around the neighborhood without assistance. However, they are completely sedentary.
They have very low physiological health reserves.
Exactly. They're balancing on a nice edge, placing them at high risk of falling into the next category down, which is physically frail.
Frail is a heavy word. Clinically, what defines a frail adult?
A physically frail individual can still manage basic self-care, like feeding and dressing themselves, but they struggle heavily with more demanding instrumental activities, like doing heavy housework, carrying groceries, or walking significant distances. They are highly susceptible to illness and injury.
And finally, at the bottom, you have the physically dependent. These individuals cannot execute basic activities of daily living and depend entirely on caregivers for food, bathing, and basic survival.
Right. So when Margaret walks in, you have to assess where she is on this continuum.
Because if she is physically independent but sedentary, she needs a vastly different approach than someone who is physically frail and uses a walker.
You must match the exercise prescription precisely to their category to avoid overwhelming them and shattering their self-efficacy.
Precisely. Which brings us to the mechanics of actual implementation. We understand the biological necessity. We understand the psychological fragility of the client and how to build their confidence. But how is this lifestyle actually implemented in the real world so that it becomes a permanent habit?
It cannot just be about forcing Margaret to drive to a sterile gym for 30 minutes, hating every second of it, and then driving home.
No. To achieve the compression of morbidity, the movement has to become integrated into life itself. This is the art of designing the regimen.
Right. And before we talk about the specific exercises, the text emphasizes that the very first step of designing the regimen is the pre-exercise screening and assessment.
Before you ever ask a client to do a squat or get on a treadmill, you have to establish a baseline of medical safety. You can't just guess. This involves a comprehensive counseling interview, often utilizing the FIT structure.
The FIT interview is a crucial diagnostic tool. It stands for frequency, intensity, and time.
So instead of just asking, do you exercise, which often yields vague or exaggerated answers, you ask the client to narrate their life. Walk me through a typical week. Tell me about your household chores.
Exactly. If they say they vacuum, you probe with the FIT questions. How frequent is it? Once a week. How intense is it? Do you break a sweat? Do you have to carry the vacuum up the stairs? For how long do you do it? 10 minutes or an hour?
And if they say they walk their dog, you ask, is the dog dragging you briskly down the street? Or are you stopping every 10 feet for the dog to sniff a tree? You are trying to establish their true baseline of daily energy expenditure.
Right. And during this screening, you are acting as a detective, listening for very specific medical red flags that mandate physician clearance before they can start any program.
The clinical red flags are non-negotiable. If a client reports unusual fatigue or shortness of breath with usual low exertion activities, if they have a known heart murmur, if they experience dizziness or fainting spells,
or if they report feeling their heart skipping beats or fluttering in their chest, or, crucially, if they report intermittent claudication.
Intermittent claudication, let's define that, because a lot of people might feel this and just think it's a muscle cramp.
Intermittent claudication is a severe cramping pain, usually in the calves, thighs, or buttocks, that occurs predictably during physical exertion, like walking a certain distance, and is promptly relieved by rest.
Wow, okay.
It is a massive red flag because it is typically caused by peripheral artery disease, severe blockages in the arteries supplying blood to the legs. The muscle is literally screaming for oxygen that the calcified pipes cannot deliver.
If a client reports claudication or any of the other red flags, they go straight to a cardiologist. You do not pass go.
Exactly.
But assuming the client is screened, clears the red flags, and is approved for low to moderate intensity exercise, how do we design the actual movements? Because the text introduces a philosophy that I think is revolutionary compared to standard gym culture.
Functional exercise design.
Yes, the golden rule is functional exercise design.
Functional exercise design is the antithesis of the traditional bodybuilding approach that dominated fitness for decades. Traditional exercise often focuses on isolating individual muscles using rigid machines.
You sit in a pad chair, you pull a lever, and you isolate your bicep. You sit on another machine, extend your leg, and isolate your quadriceps.
Functional exercise demands that the selected movements must simulate and directly map onto the everyday activities actually encountered by the client in their real life. Clinically, we call these ADLs, or activities of daily living.
Because at the end of the day, an older adult doesn't care what their 1-rep max is on a seated leg extension machine. That number is meaningless to their quality of life.
Completely meaningless.
What they care about is, can I carry a heavy bag of potting soil from the trunk of my car to the garden without throwing out my back? Can I get down on the living room floor to play blocks with my grandchildren? And more importantly, do I have the power to get back up off the floor without needing someone to pull me up?
Can I reach the high shelves in the kitchen? Precisely. The goal is functional independence, not muscular aesthetics. The text identifies 3 primary domains of human function that must be trained. First is the lower body, which encompasses all up and down activities, getting in and out of chairs, climbing stairs, getting off the floor.
Okay.
Second is locomotor activities, walking, changing directions, stepping over obstacles. Third is upper body and trunk, which involves all carrying, pushing, pulling, and reaching activities.
A functional exercise program ties the gym movement directly to the real-world task.
Yes. So instead of putting a client on a seated leg extension machine, which serves almost no real-world purpose because you rarely lift heavy weight with your shins while sitting down, what do you have them do?
You have them perform a squat, but you don't call it a squat because that sounds intimidating.
What?
You have them practice sitting down into a chair, pausing, and then using explosive power to stand back up without using their hands.
You are training the exact neuromuscular pathway required for them to get off the toilet independently. Instead of a bicep curl, you give them a medicine ball and have them practice picking it up off the floor and placing it onto a shelf, simulating loading groceries. You are training the muscle chains to work in harmony exactly as they must in the real world.
And this brilliant philosophy of functional mapping extends beyond the structured 30-minute workout sessions in a clinic. It bleeds into the rest of their day through a concept the researchers call the daily dose.
The daily dose is fantastic.
I found this to be one of the most practical, immediately actionable concepts in the entire body of literature.
The daily dose is a strategy for long-term adherence. It is about seamlessly integrating movement mini routines into the standard, unavoidable routines of daily life.
Yeah.
The goal is to attach physical exertion to things the client does almost every single day, so they don't even have to think about working out.
It's habit stacking. You take a new, fragile habit like doing squats, and you superglue it to an old, unbreakable habit. We all brush our teeth. We all stand at the bathroom sink for 2 minutes every morning and every night.
Yeah.
The text provides a literal table of activities of daily living boost suggestions, and it uses oral care as a trigger. It suggests that when you are standing in the washroom brushing your teeth, that becomes the automatic trigger to execute your lower body daily dose.
So while you brush, you do 10 partial squats. You do 10 alternating standing hamstring curls. You do 10 side leg lifts to activate the glutes.
It takes exactly the 2 minutes you were already going to spend standing there, but you have transformed dead time into a daily maintenance dose for your fast twitch fibers.
The researchers call these daily routine linkages, and they can be applied everywhere. Another powerful example from the text is evening television viewing.
Oh yeah, that's a big one.
For millions of older adults, lying in bed or sitting on the couch watching an hour of television before sleep is an unbreakable daily routine. The text suggests making the television program the trigger for the core and trunk daily dose.
While lying in bed watching the show, the client performs knee to chest stretches to open the lower back. They do hip bridge lifts to activate the posterior chain. They do bent knee lowers for core stability.
It transforms entirely passive sedentary time into a vital maintenance program for physical independence.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? I challenge you right now to think about your own daily dose. What is a habit you perform every single day without fail where you could attach a functional movement?
Good question.
Is it making your morning coffee? While the coffee brews for 3 minutes, could you do counter push-ups and calf raises? Are you waiting for the microwave? Could you do alternating lunges? If you can successfully link a functional movement to a daily task, you completely bypass the psychological hurdle of getting dressed to go work out. You simply make movement a non-negotiable part of existing in your house.
But the clinical literature acknowledges a hard truth too. While the daily dose is incredibly effective for maintenance and baseline strength, it isn't necessarily thrilling.
Right. Doing squats while brushing your teeth is practical, but it lacks joy.
Exactly. To truly ensure lifelong adherence, to generate actual enthusiasm, and to elevate the quality of life, the text introduces the second, and arguably most important, half of a lifestyle activity plan: the social adventure.
The social adventure. This is where the clinical dryness fades away and the actual joy of being alive enters the prescription.
Exactly. The text defines a social adventure as an event that integrates positive physical, social, mental, and even spiritual activities into a single cohesive experience.
Yes.
It isn't just exercise, it's an event.
It could be joining a local club for a long hike through a nature preserve. It could be joining a bowling league. It could be getting dressed up and going ballroom dancing on a Friday night.
And what's absolutely fascinating is how the text analyzes the psychology of human motivation, specifically regarding the concept of inconvenience.
Oh, this part blew my mind. The text states bluntly that any exercise activity that is deemed too inconvenient will be dropped by the client as soon as the perceived effort outweighs the perceived rewards.
If a client has to drive 30 minutes in traffic to get to a gym, struggle to find parking, and navigate a crowded locker room just to do a 20-minute workout, they will inevitably quit. The inconvenience friction is too high.
Unless the activity is a social adventure.
That is the crucial, fascinating exception to the rule of inconvenience. When an activity is a social adventure, humans will endure staggering levels of friction. The text uses downhill skiing as the ultimate example.
If you think about it objectively, downhill skiing is arguably the most inconvenient, uncomfortable physical activity ever invented by man.
It really is. You have to spend thousands of dollars on wildly expensive, heavy equipment. You have to wake up at dawn and drive for hours through treacherous mountain passes.
You have to wait in freezing, miserable lines to buy expensive lift tickets. You have to brave harsh winds and sub-zero weather and push your body to the point of severe muscular fatigue. By all logical metrics of convenience, absolutely no one should ever do it.
But people do it passionately. Millions of people eagerly anticipate winter just so they can subject themselves to that massive inconvenience. Why? Because they're having fun.
They are sharing a profound experience with their friends and family. They are out in the majesty of nature. They are laughing in the lodge afterward. The primary motivation for the entire endeavor is the social connection, the thrill, the shared mental experience.
And that is the secret weapon of the social adventure. The physiological benefits, the massive cardiovascular strain of skiing at altitude, the intense eccentric muscle activation required to turn the skis, the hyper-focused balance training, all of that incredible physiological work is just a highly beneficial byproduct of having a good time.
The client doesn't perceive it as working out. They perceive it as living.
And this represents a massive, necessary shift in how the medical community needs to view older adult health priorities. It is no longer sufficient to just prescribe rigid sets and reps in a sterile clinical environment. We have to invest in strategies that preserve autonomy, mental well-being, and an active, joyful engagement with the community.
The text cites a massive longitudinal study by Strawbridge that looked at the predictors of successful aging. The people who aged the most successfully, who compressed their morbidity the most effectively, were certainly those who walked regularly. But physical activity wasn't the only factor.
No, it wasn't.
The successful agers were characterized by having close personal contacts. They regularly did volunteer work. They attended community activities and religious services. And crucially, they reported being less apt to feel too tired to do the things they enjoyed.
It is a completely holistic feedback loop. The physical strength generated by the daily dose enables the individual to participate in the social adventure.
And the deep emotional desire to participate in the social adventure provides the psychological motivation to keep doing the daily dose. The physical enables the social, and the social motivates the physical. Okay, we have covered an immense amount of ground today. Let's pull all of this together and look at the big picture of what we've discovered in these texts. We started by completely dismantling the myth of chronological age. The calendar year you were born does not dictate your physical destiny. Your biological age, dictated by the wear and tear on your cellular machinery, is what matters.
We examined the terrifying statistics of decline, the shrinking lungs, the stiffening arteries, the dying nerves, and revealed that a vast majority of the symptoms we historically associate with normal aging are actually the direct physiological consequences of severe disuse and sedentary living. The rust is not from the passage of time. The rest is from a lack of motion.
We looked under the hood and saw the vital importance of the musculoskeletal system, specifically the incredible danger of losing our type 2 fast-twitch muscle fibers. We learned that maintaining those emergency response vehicles is the only way to maintain the explosive power necessary to catch ourselves from falling, to cross the street safely, and to navigate the dynamic physical world.
We reviewed the undeniable clinical proof that the human body remains infinitely adaptable, even into our 80s and 90s. We saw how high-intensity resistance training can sharply bend the neuromuscular aging curve upward, physically regrowing lost muscle mass and doubling strength.
We saw how aerobic training forces an older cardiovascular system to adapt peripherally, building miles of new capillaries to become incredibly efficient at extracting oxygen, entirely regardless of a lifetime of past inactivity.
And finally, we explored the clinical psychology of making it happen. We learned how to overcome the deep-seated fear and lack of self-efficacy in older adults by starting incredibly small, guaranteeing pain-free success, and tying functional real-world movements directly to our daily routines through the daily dose.
And we learned that to make it stick for a lifetime, we must enrich our lives with social adventures activities so joyful and connective that they make the physical effort entirely worthwhile. We are trying to compress morbidity, to squeeze the decline into a tiny window, and live vibrantly, powerfully until the very end.
Which leaves us with a final, rather profound implication to consider, something that builds on everything we've read today but points toward the future. We've established, through the clinical data, that the social adventure, the in-person, physically demanding, community-oriented, slightly inconvenient activity, is one of the absolute most critical factors for successful aging and long-term exercise adherence.
Right. It's the secret sauce. It's the psychological engine that makes people willing to endure the physical friction of movement.
But if we extrapolate this data and look at the trajectory of the world right now, we are witnessing a massive, unprecedented trend toward increasingly isolated, hyper-convenient, digital-first living.
Oh, absolutely. The friction of daily life is being systematically eradicated by technology.
We have remote work, eliminating the physical commute and the office environment. We have digital socialization replacing physical meetups. We have grocery delivery apps eliminating the physical act of walking the aisles and carrying bags. We have immersive virtual entertainment keeping people on their couches for hours on end. Everything is being designed to eliminate the physical inconvenience of leaving the house.
Which, based on everything we've just discussed, is a biological disaster waiting to happen. If in-person, slightly inconvenient social adventures are the fundamental key to preserving biological youth and physical independence in older adults, how on earth is this modern digital isolation going to impact the biological aging of the current younger generations, the millennials and Gen Z, when they eventually reach their 60s and 70s?
It is a looming public health crisis that researchers are just beginning to model. If you strip away the baseline requirement to physically move your body through the world in order to interact with your community and procure your basic needs, do you inadvertently strip away the exact physical movement that was keeping your cardiovascular and neuromuscular systems biologically young?
That is a remarkably heavy thought. Are we engineering a highly convenient, frictionless society that completely hinders the social adventure and, by extension, massively accelerates our own biological decay? Will the 50-year-olds of tomorrow have the physiological biology of an 80-year-old from 1990 simply because they never had to carry a bag of groceries or walk to a friend's house?
The infrastructure of our daily lives dictates the biology of our future selves. If we build a society that demands zero physical effort, the body will adapt to that lack of demand by dismantling its physical capabilities faster than ever before in human history.
That is something to seriously mull over. It is a warning sign flashing in the data. Which brings us all the way back to our opening thought. When you look at the X-ray of how a human ages, it is not a clean binary picture of inevitable decline. It is a messy, complex, highly malleable interplay of the calendar year, the couch you sit on, the community you engage with, and the physical choices you make every single day.
Exactly.
But the overwhelmingly good news, the ultimate takeaway from this deep dive, is that you hold the pen that draws the curve. You have the power to push back the rest. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the science of aging. We highly encourage you to get up right now, turn off the screen, go take a brisk walk, maybe call a friend, and plan a slightly inconvenient social adventure for this weekend, and keep those fast twitch fibers firing. We'll catch you on the next one.